Hey, good morning.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Good morning.
Hey. I'm here for the KEDA thing that is happening today, isn't it?
You're in the right place.
Good.
And Zbigniew, I assume Tom is joining and he's got most of the stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that should be the case.
How's everything going with you though, Zbigniew? It's been a bit since we've seen each other. Everything going good with the, I guess not even like 6-month-old at this point, 5-month-old?
No, it's just three
Three?
months.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So not too long.
Not too long. Yeah, it's everything fine with the baby. But I'm not sure if you recall, but my wife had a little injury with the foot right before the labor. So
Yep.
So it was pretty intense the first few weeks because she was unable to walk. So, but it is getting better, the food currently. So.
But she's even now she's still not at 100% with her.
No,
with her
no,
walking.
because she has like the broken bone, like the small bone on the foot, and it is healing very, very, very slowly. So we were afraid that she will have to go for a surgery, but eventually it is looking good. So.
That's good.
Yeah.
I'm glad she's going better, but yeah, my brother-in-law just hurt his, it wasn't his foot, it was something in his leg, but he's been out for a long time. Like that, some of those injuries just really mess you up. Hey, good evening, Tom. How you doing?
Good morning, good evening. I'm good. How are you?
Doing well.
It's almost the end of my meeting marathon. So.
Enjoy.
Okay. Cool topic. I've been looking forward to this. So we think we are ready to become an incubation project. And I decided to stay in the KubeCon team. So I made a quick overview of what KEDA is, just to recap, what we've done, and also how the community has been growing. And then I think it's mainly up to Q&A or questions that we can then just answer. So first, introductions. We can quickly do this, but my name is Tom Karkov and I'm one of the co-maintainers, and we have Zbigniew and Jeff as well. But maybe we know each other already, so we can skip this. Or Ricardo, do you want to do introductions? Or?
So it's up to you.
I know everybody, so I don't know.
I know everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's skip the introductions then. So if we just have a look at what it takes to autoscale applications on Kubernetes without KEDA, it basically comes down to this. So you have multiple deployments in your cluster. And if you then want to auto-scale them, you use an HPA. You can also do a VPA, so vertical pod autoscaler, which we leave out of scope for now. But basically, we want to scale that deployment in and out. If you want to scale a deployment based on metrics that is not native to Kubernetes, you have to use Kubernetes external metrics. So with Kubernetes external metrics, you can make them available to the HPA, but of course, you need to feed the metrics to Kubernetes. So that's where the metric adapters come in. Based on the system that you want to use, you need to install a metric adapter. But the problem here is that if you depend on multiple platforms, like I use Prometheus inside Kubernetes, but I'm also an Azure customer, so I need Azure Monitor, you're a bit blocked because you can only support one metric adapter. So then you need to work around things, use a tool like Prometheus or Azure Monitor Exporter or whatever, and have one single source of your metrics. Now, all of this works fine, but if you're new to Kubernetes, this is a lot to take in. It's a lot of infrastructure to run, and you need to become somewhat of a Kubernetes scaling expert. So we figured that this is too much. With KEDA, we basically want you to focus on scaling your application and not all the scaling internals and infrastructure. So we allow you to scale deployments, scale jobs, or practically any Kubernetes sub-resource that has the /scale sub-resource in there. To support all these other systems, we use the concept of scalers. So you can basically compose how you want to scale. You can mix and match CPU with memory and Prometheus, you name it, and you can just compose all the triggers that you want to scale. If we do not have support for what you depend on, you can also extend KEDA by using the external scaler, external push scaler, and a metrics API so that you can bring the metrics, but we will interpret the API and make the decisions for you. So we're also a bit more extensible to help you. Security is also important, which I'll come back to in a later slide, but basically we allow you to reuse credentials. We allow you to not use Kubernetes secrets, but use HashiCorp Vault or no security authentication at all. It is not enforced, but we highly encourage it, but we don't want to enforce this. We want you to optimize your workloads as well. And that's why scaling to zero is super important, meaning you only use the resources that you need. The queue is the typical example that I use. If you have a queue and there are no messages on it to process, why would you have to run 5 instances that is burning resources? So we scale down to 0. If we see there is more work, we will scale it up for you again, so that you can pick it up where you left it. Initially, it was started by Red Hat and Microsoft as an open source project in 2019. Last year in, I think, February, we became a sandbox project. And since then, it's really starting to pick up and get a lot of adoption. So if we go back here, what does it look like? So instead of using an HPA, what you do is you first install KEDA, and it comes with all these scalers out of the box. So then as an end user, what you do is you create a scaled object, and you just define what the scale target is. In this case, it's our deployment. And then you define all the triggers that you want to use. Then KEDA basically uses a scale controller to basically manage all these scaled objects. It starts monitoring them through the scalers. And if there is anything to scale on, it uses the HPA under the hood. One thing to note here is if you want to use jobs, we have a separate CRD because the scaling behavior is different, but it's fully the same concept. You define what you want to scale, when you want to scale, and we basically manage all the rest. So it's really about making auto-scaling that simple and not rocket science. Okay, and we are aiming to become the standard application auto-scaler for Kubernetes by adding more and more of these scalers, but also being open so that if you have an internal tool or something that we don't support yet, you can still use it. And that's a typical example that I use is while HPA supports CPU and memory scaling, we also have a CPU and memory scaler so that I, as an end user, can fully use KEDA for all the auto scaling instead of using KEDA for everything except for CPU and memory. There we use HPA, for example. No, KEDA is basically the application auto scaler. Okay. Now, how does it look like? KEDA basically has that metrics adapter built in. It has all the scalers built in. And KEDA is basically in charge of exposing the external metrics to Kubernetes. If we're doing 0 to 1 or 1 to 0 scaling, KEDA manages that. For all the rest, we just give the metrics to the HPA and it manages that. So we really extend Kubernetes where it is basically dropping the ball for now. It's easy to install, so you can use a simple Helm install, or if you use operators, you can use the operator hub and deploy it in your cluster. Now, what are the scalars that we support? Here are just some of them, but basically we support all the major clouds and all the major open source products. And we're constantly adding them. As you can see in version 1, we had a little bit over 10, and we're about to release 2.3 in the next couple of weeks, and we're already above 30. And I'm not including the extensibility ones like external and external push. So these are all baked in the core, but you can still use other people's external scalars as well. Now, in terms of authentication, I mentioned this before, we have separate CRDs for that. So we have the trigger authentication, which is scoped to a namespace, or cluster trigger authentication. Now, what does that do? It basically allows you to have the separation between a developer that describes the autoscaling rules, but it defers the authentication and the security to the operator. Another thing is if you have multiple workloads and you need to share the identity because it is the autoscaling identity, for example, you define it once and you reuse it multiple times. With the cluster trigger authentication, it's basically spread across the whole cluster because we had people that wanted to have centralized management for this. And instead of using the information from the workload itself, with trigger authentication, it is fully decoupled, and you can use environment variables, secrets, HashiCorp vault, and pod identity, meaning you can use Azure's managed identity or AWS so that there is even no secret involved. We also have more secret providers on the roadmap, like Spiffy, GCP, pod identity, and all of these. But we're a bit flexible there in checking the demand and then adding them accordingly. Then in terms of the, and sorry, interrupt me if you have questions there. In terms of the community, we've been growing as well. So actually, what's today? Tuesday. Yesterday, we had 3.1 stars on GitHub and more than 125 contributors, including some big ones. And we do bi-weekly stand-ups. So for example, after this call is our stand-up. But we also see a big adoption on the end user side. So I listed the ones that we can publicly list at the bottom right, but we also have Blizzard Activision who's using it. We also have IKEA, for example, that are end users. And then the ones above, for example, are other products that have standardized on KEDA to do their auto-scaling as well. And we're hoping to only have this increase more over time. We also did a nice blog post with Alibaba Cloud on the CNCF blog because they have chosen KEDA to be their application autoscaler for their cloud product. And I should know the name, but I don't know it by heart. It's the Alibaba Application X service that is basically fully relying on KEDA. And then lastly, we've also been working with the Artifact Hub people so that we can create a community around the external scalars so that they are more discoverable and we create that ecosystem. But we're also considering to move all our built-in scalar documentation that is now on KEDA.sh to Artifact Hub so that you can basically discover any KEDA scalar on Artifact Hub. Because we have some issues scaling the documentation in terms of filtering, listing, and all of that. So this would be a nice help. And also we believe that Artifact Hub is the central place for all cloud native artifacts. So we're happy to tie into that story. This is still a bit in flux, but we already have our first external scalar as a test there. And this is live already. Then contributing back is very important to us. So we're also contributing to the custom metrics API server project because we have a lot of questions about running multiple metric servers on the same cluster. Also, we went from KEDA 1 to KEDA 2, where we couldn't run them side by side, which was a problem. And also in terms of high availability, you cannot run multiple instances because of this. So we want to fix this and we're checking how we can help. But then a bigger gap that we've identified is We are looking at supporting HTTP-based autoscaling, and there is no open source specification about getting metrics about traffic in Kubernetes itself. So we have the service mesh interface for service meshes, but what about the typical service? What about an ingress and the new gateway API? So that's not there yet. I'm checking with Chris who to talk to and see if this makes sense and if we can get this. So then KEDA and other products can just rely on this traffic metric specification. Sometimes things can be so obvious that they are overlooked. So I'm wondering if I'm missing something or if people just didn't think about this yet. But we'll see. Then in terms of roadmap, we are very flexible in the roadmap, meaning we typically implement what the community asks. But if we have to list some of the major things we want to work on, this is basically it. So constantly adding new scalers and secret sources. We're working on first-class support for HTTP because we do not support that yet today because scaling HTTP is a bit more tricky, but we have an experimental story there. We are also planning on supporting cloud events to extend KEDA. So that would be in conjunction to the Kubernetes events that we have today. And then we want to make sure that people can do historical analysis and predictive scaling. Maybe that will even be part of KEDA itself, where we do the predictive part. But we want to explore that route because now we just do point-in-time autoscaling. We want to improve our high availability by running multiple instances. So there we depend on the metrics server and the operator framework. And then in general performance improvements as a whole. But those are the main topics. What does the first-class support look like? Basically, it's the same like the scaled object, but you just point to what you want to scale, what the min-max is, and what the request count is, and you can scale it automatically. While Prometheus is somewhat of an industry standard for storing metrics, we prefer not to have a dependency on it because, for example, myself, I'm also a KEDA end user. I use Azure as the cloud provider, and we do not run Prometheus today because we fully rely on Azure Monitor, which has nice Kubernetes integration. It would be a pity if I would have to run and maintain Prometheus as well, just to do HTTP-based autoscaling, which is possible today with Prometheus, but we want to remove that hurdle. This is available in alpha. Basically, we extend KEDA with this new add-on and we intercept the traffic so that we can hold the requests if we scale from 0 to 1 or vice versa. And then to wrap up, KEDA is just one piece of the puzzle in terms of autoscaling Kubernetes, where KEDA handles the applications themselves. And then when the cluster capacity is starving, we always recommend you to use cluster autoscaler to scale that cluster. And then also virtual kubelet comes in nicely because if the cluster autoscaler cannot kick in fast enough, you can use a virtual kubelet, and depending on your cloud provider, in this case, virtual nodes, you can overflow the capacity outside of your cluster. So it's not KEDA to scale everything in Kubernetes. No, it's purely on the application side. But because we leverage scale down to 0, you can fully optimize your resources so that you can fully rebalance and save that compute cost that you don't need. And this was what I had prepared. But I don't know if you have any questions or if one of the co-maintainers wants to extend on what I've shared.
Yeah, some questions. So on the reliability, so you only have one KEDA instance in your roadmap actually has something that allows support for multiple KEDA instances. Is that for reliability or what is that for?
No, that's more maybe it's more like for isolation of the deployments. So for example, if the customer wants to host multiple tenants on one cluster and want to distinguish between separate deployments. So basically, it's the isolation. It's not like the performance reasons or anything like that, but just to enable users to
it's actually twofold. Yeah? So what Zibinek said is true. So people want to run multiple installations of KEDA in parallel, which are isolated, because you have the option to watch everything in the cluster or just the namespace. The other thing is that if you have a KEDA installation, you can only run one instance of the deployments in KEDA because operator framework doesn't support that. And the metrics API server also doesn't support that. So we cannot support high availability, let's say, other than just rely on Kubernetes so that if an instance crashes, it boots another one up, and that's that. So that's the upstream work that I mentioned.
So that means like in the case of going down, your auto scaling event might be paused for a little bit until it comes back up or something.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, basically there will be like a short period of time until Kubernetes scale a new pod for our KEDA deployment.
And presumably during that period of time, however many instances there were, just carry on being that number.
Yeah. The only issue would be the HPA that will not be able to scale because it can't fetch the metrics because it's down.
But that's a common issue with operators and controllers in Kubernetes. So it is not something specific to KEDA, but that's how does it work.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and it is documented. So maybe I can quickly share that, but we also have an operational guide on the documentation which says, hey, you can only run one instance, and these are the typical resources that we recommend.
So another question that I have about it. Okay, go ahead. So,
just showing that firewall and cluster capacity and high availability. So it is documented. If people want to know.
It's cool.
Cool. And the secrets support, that's for KEDA to be able to talk to the cloud providers? Or I mean,
yes,
really
so
sure.
Let me go to authentication.
Basically, I can explain it on an example. So basically, for example, I would like to scale my deployment that is talking to Kafka cluster. So it will scale based on the messages in the Kafka topic. So obviously, I don't want to store my credentials in a plain text in the CRD. So I would like to keep my secrets in the Kubernetes secret or in the vault. So then I can easily fetch the secrets to KEDA, and KEDA.
And in that example, that's credentials for accessing Kafka.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yep.
You also mentioned that you have some RBAC or some certain users can access those secrets, or was it like yes. Certain users? Okay.
Yeah. So we have two different concepts here. So we have trigger authentication, which is available just in one namespace, so everybody in that namespace can access it. We also have cluster trigger authentication, meaning I, as an operator, can define it once for the whole cluster, and then Zibinek just needs the name of that cluster trigger authentication resource. He adds it to his scaled object, but he has no idea how the what is being used. Is it a Kubernetes secret? Is it a managed identity? He doesn't know. He doesn't care, basically. So you lock it down to just the people who have access to the trigger authentication.
Got it. Yeah, see, there's a lot of newer features compared to last year. So
I'm happy you noticed.
I was intrigued by how this interacts with the cluster autoscaling. Kind of how do you define, I don't know, at what point, okay, this is too big for KEDA to have, or like.
We've had a lot of questions. Will you do cluster autoscaling as well? We've also been talking to the people from Carpenter, which is an AWS project that does that, to see if there's overlap or how we integrate. But we've stuck with applications for now because you typically do one thing and you do one thing well.
Yeah.
So we were checking if we could provide a hook, for example, to cluster autoscaler, where, for example, if we see that we will scale from 1 to 20, that we notify them upfront. Unfortunately, there's no way in cluster autoscaler to do that, and we had the impression that there's no plan to open it up as well. So I don't think we will do cluster autoscaling soon, but we would rather try to help proactively triggering the cluster autoscaler.
Yeah, the point is that we can quite easily scale basically any resource on Kubernetes cluster. So if there is some kind of CRD for cluster autoscaler that we can notify, it will basically work out of the box. But as far as I know, the cluster autoscaler right now is a big monolith that is doing the magic inside with the CPU and memory requests. So it is pretty hard to extend it this way. But if they, let's say, open the API a little bit, it could be pretty easily done from our side.
And you probably could autoscale like a virtual kubelet pretty much just like any other resource.
Yeah, we can already do that today. Nice. So if for example, I'm an Azure customer, so I use Azure virtual nodes today so that I don't care about the cluster. If it can keep up, I just go to Azure container instances in the meantime. But we cannot proactively trigger the cluster scaling, unfortunately.
Yeah, in the big block, like indirectly, the cluster will still scale because KEDA will schedule a bunch of pods, and then eventually your cluster is going to be like, you've overscheduled me, and then the monolithic mystery of the cluster autoscaler will be like, well, shoot, KEDA's asking for more than it can solve. But yeah, this has been an ongoing conversation we've had for a while, including with some of the, I guess, previously SIGs around autoscaling of, to Zibinek's point, if there was extensibility, like we're using the extensibility points of the horizontal pod autoscaler today to do all of this. Like it's just part of the external metrics that provides. There's no external metrics concept for the cluster autoscaling. And so like we just are stuck to more or less say indirectly influencing those decisions. And trusting that everything's going to work, but there definitely is the request that comes up from time to time of, hey, I want to scale my cluster when my Kafka stream hits whatever, 1 million unprocessed events. And we're like, yeah, we can't directly do that today.
Yeah.
I think last week during our project hours and my KEDA session, I had the question 3 to 4 times. So clearly there's a gap. Question is who will fix it?
Yeah, that's fair. The other question I had was about that, or just to understand a little bit more about the, was it traffic metrics interface that you're looking at standardizing? Feels like that would be something that Tag Network might have a view on. I don't think that's I don't think you need to get that resolved before incubation, but I'm just curious about how that.
Yeah, so I was asking Lee, I forgot his last name, from Tag Network indeed, because the original question was, hey, is this network or is this observability? We figured to go the network route, but I didn't get a response yet. So we'll see.
Okay.
Would be nice to have though.
Yeah.
And I'll just, if there aren't any more questions or while those wait, I'll just plus one to Tom's point on over the last year, both in terms of the new features, but I've been blown away with just the adoption of this in terms of the amount of, I know we skipped intros, but I work on the Azure side. So I'm a product manager across a bunch of our PaaS and serverless stuff and work close with the Kubernetes team. But I spend a bunch of my time just with all these organizations who are going microservices in Kubernetes and using KEDA. In fact, I just looked it up, and 3.2% of every Kubernetes cluster in Azure today has the KEDA operator.
Oh, wow.
So it's pretty, and it's growing at a steady click. I think Zibionek and Tom have heard me. 6 months ago, it was probably like 2.3% or something.
Yeah.
So it's really become a pivotal component for a lot of these event-driven architectures, because we just make it really easy for them to pull in these event sources. So have been really impressed with the adoption from this. And I think during KubeCon 2, Tom and Zibionek were also pleased to see how many people showed up knocking on the door too, saying like, hey, this seems like it might solve something for us here. So it's been really exciting to be a part of.
That's a great data point. So make sure it goes in the incubation DD document. I think that'll be it's a very strong validation. Yeah.
Do you have any numbers of the community growth, like number of users, or well, you did have a number of GitHub stars, but any metrics based on that? I mean, that can go in the due diligence document.
Yeah, we've got because there's a lot of usage we just don't know about, and it's only because I happen to be on the Azure side that's the one glimpse that I get is for folks who use our tooling to install it, that we can get a signal of that. But we have the general, which is like the number of contributors, the number of people who are engaging, number of stars, all the standard open source available metrics. And then I'm more than happy to use that. Like, hey, we can tell that, for people using the Azure tooling, 3.2% are using KEDA as well. No idea how many people in like EKS or GKE or Alibaba or whatever else are using it too, but we can project.
Yeah. So based on all this information, I think this is good to go for incubation, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, I think we should just get the DD document, sorted. I'm glad to hear that, Ricardo, that's your view, because that's kind of where I've been landing as well. Yeah. So.
And Tom, by the way, we see your Gmail for what it's worth. Okay. Before you go and type in a chat and you're like, wow, Jeff's talking.
What's he going to show us here?
I'm just cleaning up while we wrap up.
You're fine. And I know we've also got the KEDA stand-up starting soon. So
yeah, one interesting piece that you have there that you're supporting a SPIFFE now too. Like,
yeah, actually today I discovered this is a documentation bug, because we list GCP and SPIFFE already, but we don't support it yet. So I need to fix this today.
Okay.
But yeah, we want to support SPIFFE as well, because it's also more of an open way of doing identity. And really, this should be the aim for every customer, to not use any secrets at all. Just use any of these no secret providers.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your support. If you would have any other questions, just let us know, and I can post the slides on the PR, on the TOC if you want, so that everybody can have a look.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'm sure as part of the DD document, we'll want to be able to refer to this recording and the slides. So, yeah.
Did somebody start the recording?
I can see there's a recording.
Yeah, but I think Ricardo did it. I'm going to give Ricardo the credit.
No, it automatically records, right?
So, even better. Well, I'm still going to give you the credit.
but I can, this gets uploaded to the CNCF channel, so
Great.
It's available later. So yeah, so we'll have it up there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Wonderful. Right. I see that going in there right now. So
yeah, otherwise I will forget.
Yeah. All right. Thanks very much for putting that together, Tom. And I'll contact you out of band about getting the due diligence document started.
Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.